The cameras flashed. The world cheered. The headlines painted the perfect picture: a king and his queen, Elvis and Priscilla's fairy tale wedding. But what if it wasn't a fairy tale? What if behind the glamour, the smiles, and the lavish celebration, the king of rock and roll was drowning in regret? To millions, this was the pinnacle of romance. The dashing rock star, the beautiful young bride, a wedding fit for royalty. Every moment, from the sleek black tuxedo to the breathtaking lace gown, was carefully documented and immortalized. Yet behind the polished facade lurked a devastating reality. While the world was enchanted by the love story unfolding before their eyes, Elvis himself was trapped in a moment he never truly wanted. The wedding, the vows, the grand reception, it all felt like a scripted performance rather than a celebration of love. For a man who built his life on charisma, freedom, and rebellion, the ceremony that was supposed to be the happiest day of his life was anything but. He stood beside Priscilla, smiling for the flashing cameras, yet inside he felt utterly powerless. The wedding itself was shockingly brief, just 8 minutes. For a man of Elvis's stature, a star who commanded the world's attention, such a fleeting ceremony seemed bizarre. Only 14 guests were present, a stark contrast to the grand spectacle the world had imagined. Even some of his closest friends, the ones who had been by his side through fame, fortune, and heartbreak, were conspicuously absent. Why? Why was an event of such magnitude reduced to a rushed, almost clinical exchange of vows? Why did the ceremony feel more like a transaction than a true declaration of love? Immediately after saying "I do," Elvis and Priscilla weren't whisked away to a private moment of celebration. Instead, they were thrust into a press conference facing an unrelenting media storm. Cameras clicked, reporters fired off questions, and the couple put on a flawless display of joy and affection. Every loving glance, every rehearsed answer, every affectionate touch, it all seemed orchestrated. The world saw a man deeply in love, a couple basking in the glow of their new life together. But what they didn't see was the truth hiding behind Elvis's eyes, a truth that would soon come to light in 5 devastating words. The celebration didn't stop with the vows. An extravagant breakfast reception followed, filled with music executives, Hollywood elite, and powerful industry figures. MGM, RCA, and William Morris executives mingled with family and friends, ensuring that the event was not just a personal affair, but a business move. The spectacle continued. Champagne flowed, laughter echoed through the room, and the newlyweds posed for endless photos. But beneath the dazzling display of wealth and romance, something was deeply wrong. Elvis, the king of rock and roll, the man who commanded audiences of thousands, sat quietly, lost in thought. The energy that once radiated from him, the effortless charm that made him a legend, was noticeably absent. There was only one person who truly saw what was happening behind the scenes. Alberta Holman, affectionately known as Alberta V5, was more than just a housekeeper at Graceland. She was a trusted confidant, a silent witness to both Elvis's happiest and most vulnerable moments. She had watched over him for years, tending to his home and his heart, always knowing when something was wrong. But nothing could have prepared her for what she found just hours before the wedding. Elvis Presley, the man who had the world at his feet, sat alone, his head in his hands, tears silently streaming down his face. Alberta hesitated before speaking. Finally, she asked the question that lingered in the air like an unspoken truth. Why don't you just call it off? A simple question. A question most men in his position could have answered without hesitation. After all, wasn't he the king? The man who set his own rules, lived by his own terms? If he was truly unhappy, why was he going through with it? Alberta waited, expecting him to shake his head, to make a joke, to find some way to lighten the moment. But instead he looked up at her, his face heavy with emotion, and whispered 5 words that sent a chill through the room. "I don't have a choice." 5 words, softly spoken, yet carrying the weight of a man who felt trapped. For a moment, the silence between them was deafening. Alberta had seen Elvis in moments of weakness before, but never like this. These weren't the words of a man about to embark on the happiest day of his life. These weren't the words of someone making a lifelong commitment out of love. They were the words of someone who was being pulled into something he had no power to resist. But how? How could Elvis Presley, the most famous entertainer in the world, adored by millions with wealth, power, and influence beyond imagination, feel so powerless? What force could possibly push him into a moment he so clearly did not want? And most importantly, if Elvis didn't have a choice, then who did? For years, Elvis Presley had been in control. He dictated his own path, bent the rules to his will, and lived by his own design. But when it came to this wedding, when it came to this moment, control was something he no longer had. Because behind the scenes, forces beyond his reach had been closing in, pressuring him toward a decision that would alter the course of his life forever. One of those forces was Priscilla's father, Captain Joseph Beaulieu. A strict military man, Joseph had long harbored concerns about his teenage daughter's relationship with the most famous entertainer in the world. For years, he had watched as Priscilla's life revolved around Elvis as she moved to Graceland at just 17, waiting patiently for a commitment that never came. By 1966, he had waited long enough. Rumors swirled that Joseph had drawn a hard line. Either Elvis made the relationship official or he would take legal action. Given the delicate circumstances of their early years together, it was a threat Elvis couldn't ignore. But Joseph Beaulieu wasn't the only one forcing Elvis's hand. Another man, one whose influence overshadowed nearly every major decision in Elvis's career, was pulling the strings from behind the curtain, Colonel Tom Parker. To Parker, marriage wasn't about love. It wasn't about personal happiness. It was about image. The Colonel knew that Elvis's reputation was everything. The world saw him as a heartthrob, a larger-than-life figure, a long-term, undefined relationship with a young woman, especially one who had moved in with him before marriage, could lead to scandal. And scandal in Parker's mind was bad for business. So he made it simple. Marry her or let her go. There could be no in-between, no more uncertainty, no more years of speculation. A proper wedding would solidify Elvis's image as a devoted husband, quelling any rumors before they could become a real problem. It would satisfy the press, calm public curiosity, and keep everything under control. But there was yet another possible factor at play: Priscilla herself. For years, she had been the hidden girlfriend of the most sought-after man on the planet. She had sacrificed her normal teenage years, her freedom, her life outside of Elvis's shadow. Was she really willing to risk losing everything if he walked away? Some speculated that she too had placed pressure on him, that she had warned Elvis that if he backed out, she wouldn't stay silent. There were details about their early years together, secrets that, if revealed to the press, could have caused a firestorm of controversy. Whether or not this was true didn't matter, because the fear of scandal was enough to push Elvis further into a corner. And so the stage was set. The wedding went ahead. The world celebrated. The cameras captured a dazzling display of romance, but behind closed doors, the reality was far different. Because even after saying "I do," Elvis's troubles were far from over. In fact, his heartbreak was only just beginning. Elvis and Priscilla had said their vows. The cameras had captured every moment. The press had declared their love story a dream come true, and the world had accepted the illusion. Now it was time for their honeymoon, a moment meant to solidify their bond, to mark the beginning of their life together. But something was off. Unlike the grand, extravagant honeymoons that most celebrities of their stature indulged in, Elvis and Priscilla's honeymoon was startlingly brief. Just 3 days in Palm Springs. It was rushed, almost obligatory. There were no long romantic getaways, no leisurely trips through Europe, no secluded island retreat, no time spent simply enjoying each other's presence away from the public eye. Instead, it felt like yet another carefully controlled part of the narrative, another performance, another scene in a play that Elvis had no choice but to act in. The honeymoon wasn't the start of a beautiful new chapter. It was a continuation of the same routine. And then, just weeks after the wedding, everything changed. Priscilla discovered she was pregnant. Most newlyweds would have celebrated this news. It would have been a joyful confirmation of their love, a sign of a future filled with family and happiness. But for Elvis, it wasn't joy he felt. It was something else entirely. Something darker. Priscilla had always been a source of comfort, someone he could mold, someone who represented a youthful innocence that he cherished. But now, in his eyes, she had become something else, something unfamiliar. She was no longer just the young, devoted girlfriend who had waited for him all those years. She was about to become a mother, and that changed everything. Elvis had always struggled with complex views on intimacy, relationships, and love. The idea of Priscilla carrying his child seemed to shift the entire dynamic of their relationship overnight. He became distant, cold, detached in a way that Priscilla had never experienced before. The man who had once controlled every aspect of her life, who dictated how she dressed, how she spoke, how she moved, now barely seemed to see her at all. And as the months passed, that emotional distance only grew deeper. At first, Priscilla tried to ignore it. She told herself it was the stress of the pregnancy, the pressures of fame, the weight of everything Elvis was dealing with. But deep down, she knew. Something between them had shifted, and no matter what she did, she couldn't bring Elvis back to her. The man she had loved, the man she had waited for, the man she had finally married. He was slipping away. Nights that were once filled with laughter and conversation became long and silent. The intimate moments they had shared in their early years became increasingly rare. And when Elvis did seek comfort, it wasn't from her. He threw himself into his work, immersing himself in music, films, and relentless schedules that kept him away from home. When he wasn't working, he surrounded himself with his entourage, his friends, his bodyguards, the people who made him feel like the king of rock and roll. And then there were the other women. For years, rumors had followed Elvis about his infidelities, but now they were impossible for Priscilla to ignore. He no longer tried to hide them. The emotional walls between them had grown so high that it was as if he didn't care. Priscilla, once the center of his world, now felt like an outsider in her own marriage. She had given him everything: her youth, her devotion, her love. She had done everything he had ever asked of her, and yet it still wasn't enough. Years later, she would reflect on this painful realization in one haunting confession. Elvis had a hard time dealing with me being a mother. It was as if the very thing that should have brought them closer, their child, had instead created an irreversible wedge between them. The cracks in their marriage had appeared just weeks after the wedding. Now they were deepening, and soon they would reach the breaking point. By 1972, the illusion was impossible to maintain. For years, Priscilla had lived in the shadow of Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, the man the world adored. She had waited for him, shaped herself into what he wanted, played the role of the devoted wife. But the truth was undeniable. Their marriage had never been the fairy tale the world believed it to be. The distance between them had grown unbearable. The man she had once clung to now felt like a stranger, lost in a world of excess, distractions, and fleeting affairs. The love that had once bound them together had been replaced by coldness, resentment, and an overwhelming sense of isolation. Elvis, for all his fame, fortune, and power, was slipping further into his own private turmoil. He had become restless, erratic, trapped in a cycle of self-destruction that no one, not even Priscilla, could break him out of. She had given him a home, a family, a child, but she had never truly had his heart. And so after years of struggling to hold on, she made the decision that would change everything. She walked away. It wasn't easy. How do you leave a man the world worships? How do you walk away from someone who had been your entire life since you were a teenager? But Priscilla knew the truth. Staying meant continuing to live in a marriage where she felt unseen, unloved, and unfulfilled. She wanted something more, something real. The divorce was finalized in 1973, marking the official end of their marriage. The carefully crafted illusion of their perfect love story came crashing down. Yet in reality, the cracks had been there from the very beginning. Elvis's whispered words on the eve of their wedding, "I don't have a choice," had been a prophecy, a silent truth buried beneath the weight of expectation, obligation, and pressure. He had never truly chosen this life, and in the end, neither had Priscilla. Their love story had begun in secrecy, blossomed under the constraints of fame, and unraveled under the weight of everything that came with being Elvis Presley's wife. The world had seen a fairy tale. But behind the cameras, behind the headlines, behind the carefully staged romance, there had only ever been two people desperately trying and failing to hold on to something that had never been real. And so Elvis and Priscilla parted ways, but the echoes of their love, their pain, and their heartbreak would linger forever. After the divorce, the world expected Elvis to move on effortlessly. He was still the king of rock and roll, still adored by millions, still a man who could have anything he wanted. But something had changed. For years, he had kept Priscilla at a distance, shutting her out, allowing their marriage to wither away. And yet, the moment she was truly gone, an emptiness settled in. He had spent his life being worshipped, surrounded by people who would do anything for him. But for all the admiration and devotion he received, there was only one person who had ever truly been his, Priscilla. And now, she belonged to someone else. At first, he tried to bury the pain. He continued to perform, continued to charm audiences, continued to be Elvis Presley. But those closest to him saw the shift. His energy was different. His performances lacked the fire they once had. The man who had once ruled the stage with an effortless swagger now seemed weighed down by something unseen. And then there were the nights, the long, lonely nights. Without Priscilla, without a home that felt whole, he surrounded himself with people, yet remained deeply alone. He sought comfort in distractions, in fleeting romances, in reckless indulgences, in anything that could temporarily numb the ache of what he had lost. But nothing worked. He watched from afar as Priscilla built a new life, one without him. She found love again, regained her independence, and slowly stepped out of the shadow he had kept her in for so many years. And for the first time, Elvis understood something he had never admitted before. It was never about whether or not he loved Priscilla. He had loved her in his own way, in the only way he knew how. But love was never the foundation of their marriage. It had been built on expectation, on obligation, on forces beyond their control. And when it ended, Elvis was left to face a truth he had long ignored. He had spent his life being adored by the world, but in the end, he had lost the one person who had loved him not as a legend, not as an icon, but simply as a man. As the years passed, the weight of regret, of loneliness, of all the choices he had never truly made settled deeper into his soul. And as his life spiraled further into excess, as his health declined, as the sparkle in his eyes began to fade, one truth remained. The king of rock and roll could have anything he wanted, except for the one thing he had lost forever, her. Elvis Presley was more than just a musician. He was a cultural phenomenon, a symbol of fame, power, and desire. But behind the dazzling performances and the worldwide adoration, he was a man fighting battles no one could see. His marriage to Priscilla had been presented as a love story for the ages, but in reality, it was a carefully constructed illusion. One built on pressure, obligation, and a destiny he never truly had control over. The words he whispered on the eve of his wedding, "I don't have a choice," were not just a reflection of that moment. They were a reflection of his entire life. And in the years that followed, as his marriage crumbled, as his health declined, as he drifted further from the man he once was, those 5 words would echo louder than ever. So now, we turn the question to you. Was Elvis Presley ever truly in love with Priscilla? Or was their marriage nothing more than a performance for the world? Did he ever have a real choice, or was he simply playing a role that had been written for him long before he ever said, "I do"? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most shocking moments of Elvis's life, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update.